So we're going to talk today about moving from overwhelmed to in control and how we're going to get out of this old cycle of vulnerability management and into reducing the actual number of vulnerabilities we have to deal with in our environments. We're going to talk about the evolving risk and compliance landscape, what we're seeing in the shift to autonomous workflows, because that is the buzzword of the last 2 years, and then how we're going to use data to make good decisions in our risk reduction strategy, and how we're going to unlock the potential and the resources in our organizations through these automations. For those of you that don't know me, my name again is Melissa Bischoping. I am Senior Director of Security and Product Design Research, which means I get to work on some of the hardest challenges and get them into our product and into the hands of our customers. What you need to know about me is that I am so driven and focused on making these problems easier. We burn so much time, we burn out our staff, and I want to bring frameworks and solutions to the industry. So as we move into the topics today, let's talk about the risk and compliance landscape. We see threat actor behavior changing. So dwell time. Everyone here has heard for years, dwell time could be weeks, could be months. But in the last year, we're seeing that dwell time move into days. Recently, we're seeing studies cited as 1 to 2 days. So that means attackers are existing in your environment for very little time before they're being detected, which means they're moving quickly to get their objectives completed and get out. We're also seeing as many as 81% of attacks malware-free. That means they're not using your traditional Cobalt Strike implants. They're living off the land. They're using your stolen credentials. They're persisting in your environment in ways that evade your traditional detection measures. That makes them more challenging. We're also seeing, and this really shouldn't come as a surprise, we're seeing no shortage in the number of vulnerabilities. So last year we finally broke that 40,000 number of vulnerabilities released in a year. We're on track to beat that this year. But it's not just the number of vulnerabilities identified, it's the number being exploited. So I actually ran the numbers last night, and we are at 574 vulnerabilities that are known to be exploited so far in 2025. As you can see, that probably puts us on pace to outpace what we saw in 2024, which was 881. We're going to come back to that ratio of known exploited to total identified here in a couple of slides. AI, it's helping us as defenders, but it is absolutely helping our adversaries. New attacks are not only leveraging AI to weaponize their exploits, to do social engineering, but then we're seeing things like remote code execution through AI models and through AI toolkits. So it's an entirely new attack surface that we've got to add to our already overwhelming ecosystem. And then there's regulatory requirements. Now, I did some digging on some of the changes here in Australia, and it looks like in 2024 and 2025, you've got additional reporting requirements on ransomware breaches, and you've got potential litigation that can happen if personal information is leaked in a breach. So you're gonna have the additional complexity and financial risk to your business for any of these breaches as well. So this is actually a chart that a friend of mine, Patrick Garrity over at VulnCheck, put together, and I love this because this is looking at just the first half of 2025 and what we actually see in the known exploited landscape. Now, keyword there is known exploited. These are things that ransomware actors, APTs, have actually exploited in environments. These aren't theoretical, these are known exploited. What's important here, at least to me, is that so many people, when they think about where their biggest vulnerabilities and risks lie, they think about very specific categories of software, or, oh, well, we have the most Windows machines, we have the most Chrome browsers, so we need to focus on that. If you're like me and you looked up here, you might have been like, I actually don't know what some of these things are. I've never seen them before. Did we acquire these in an M&A that I'm not aware of? Do we even have these? What is that? I don't know. What this means is that they're going to be high touch because your teams are probably going to have to get smart on some of the technology. They're going to read about it. They're going to say, okay, we've got known exploitation of a random thing I've never heard of. I got to go learn what it does. How do we patch it? Does it require down? I don't know. And I see this happen over and over again. These things take so much time, but they are also where you have to focus because that's where the threat actors are focusing. We're going to come back to that here in just a minute. So I look at this slide and people often say, well, yeah, this is literally what my vuln management team is for. Let's talk about your vuln management team. Old school vuln management strategy is what I like to call taking the spreadsheet of what we found in our last scan and throwing it into the bucket of dirty mop water. We're trying to clean up. We're trying to make progress. But what I find is that we're just continuing to shovel scans of 50,000 vulnerabilities into a bucket. And then that bucket gets handed off to our patch team and we say, good luck, guys, have fun. That's not sustainable, and it's not making progress. And we almost wear these vulnerability spreadsheets like a badge of honor of like, look how many vulnerabilities we found. Cool, but what are we doing about them? Like, vuln management is not vuln scanning. There's actually the other side of the process, which is the resolution. Success in managing vulnerabilities means we have to look at how many of these are worth our time, because humans are our most expensive resource in this industry. How do we apply that critical analysis? How do we prioritize them? And how do we say, yeah, I know there's a whole laundry list of these up here, but I know exactly which one is the best use of my time, my team's time today. And that's what we're going to talk about. Autonomous workflows. That is the magic word in our industry right now. And everyone's looking for ways they can use automation and AI to make their lives easier, make their teams more productive. Analysts have predicted that by 2027, autonomous endpoint management will account for reducing human effort by 40% in IT teams. We're also seeing research that says the number of organizations who plan to implement autonomous endpoint management in 2023, I think, was around 50%. They're looking at over 90% of organizations are expected to have adopted autonomous technologies in the next year. Everyone's moving this way. So how do we apply it to vuln management? Well, Australia has done probably the best job, and I'm privileged that I get to talk to organizations all over the world about their different frameworks and how they're applying these things. I love what you guys have done with the Essential 8 because it's actually one of the most actionable frameworks I've seen. It's not hand-waving over some generalized guidelines. It's actually pretty prescriptive. And if I was a mid-sized business and I'm a brand new CISO and I come in and I'm like, all right, how am I going to spend my first 100 days? Australian or not, this gives me a great roadmap. And I love the framework itself. I also love the fact that the Essential 8 framework, if you look in the maturity column for the most mature ecosystems, so many of those things are candidates for automation. It's literally giving you your yellow brick road to the wonderful Wizard of Oz of automation. So the goal here is that we're shifting and not waiting for things to come back on audit and compliance reports. We're not waiting to get fined because we didn't adhere to something. We're looking at this as our plan, how we're going to move forward, and we're going to automate as many of these things as possible. Let's look at this, though, another way. This is my new favorite visual. So this is what I call the vulnerability reduction funnel. So we had our bucket of dirty mop water where we were throwing all of our vulnerabilities. Let's make this a funnel and actually reduce the things that are going down. And you're going to see this come up over the next couple of slides, so get used to it. This visual helps us start building a strategy. What you see up in the top of this bucket are the things you should be really focusing on automating. Now, this is your standard patching, the stuff that's safe, browsers, PDF viewers, Office software, your Windows operating system, the stuff that's typically pretty good, great candidates for automation, especially if you're using good data to make the decision. And also doing things like your standard operating environments, your gold images, right? When you deploy things, how are you doing that initial deployment and setup? Those things should always be considered automation worthy. These are basically hygiene essentials. Down here in the bottom of the bucket, however, we have what I call the high touch bucket. This is where your vulnerability management teams spend most of their time. The problem is, right now, a lot of stuff that should be in that top bucket is down in the bottom bucket. They're still spending a lot of time manually deploying patches. When you look at what your teams are doing, the goal becomes how many of these things can we move from high-touch workflows into the automation bucket? Which things are they doing today that are good candidates for automation? Because if we don't move things out of that high-touch bucket, teams are going to be burned out. That list of pending vulnerabilities that need to be resolved is going to keep getting longer. The water in the mop bucket is going to keep getting dirtier, and we're not going to be making progress. So, successful automation, less stuff in the high-touch bucket, more focus, more prioritization from those teams who can apply their expertise to the most complex problems. Another trend that we're seeing when we talk about automation and risk is this concept of continuous threat exposure management. Is anybody familiar with CTEM or continuous threat exposure management? Cool, we're gonna get a primer on it today. So once you've started automating, you're removing the unused software, you've moved a lot of stuff into that automation bucket, now what? There's still stuff in the high touch piece. Well, we're gonna go through this 5-step process, and we're going to show how that can equip you to make better decisions, gain stakeholder buy-in, and continue to elevate your maturity. The first step is that you have to do the ongoing scoping of your environment. Alongside that, you need to be doing continuous discovery. All of these things should be real time. You shouldn't be waiting for a quarterly or a monthly scan to tell you that you have new SaaS applications or that you've got new endpoints that have onboarded. All has to be real time. Once you've actually got that inventory, then comes the prioritization piece of continuous threat exposure management. We're going to talk a little more about this on a slide coming up here in a second, but this is where you're using threat intelligence, exploit intelligence, and the context of your environment to say, of the things left in my high-touch bucket, I have to prioritize them. Which ones do I start with first? Validation. This is the trust but continually verify component. Yeah, you applied the patch. Did it require a reboot, and was the reboot ever completed? You have to do those additional steps of validation. It can't just be an assumption that the vulnerability is truly patched. And then lastly, and this is probably the hardest part, it's mobilizing your people. So when you have these prioritizations, you have the validation, you're able to say, hey, we're making progress. Now it's time to say, okay, here's what's left. We need investment, we need funding, we need teams, or we need to modernize this other system so that we can get off of this heavy manual workflow. But you've got the data points along the way to prove the value. And this is, again, you'll notice, it's a cycle. This iterates. And so the things that are in that prioritization list of where you should be focusing your time, you should be seeing those change constantly because you're eliminating the ones at the top of the priority list and working your way down. This is how we make progress. All of that's only possible with great data. I'm a data nerd, did a lot of statistics work in college. Obviously now that's a big part of my job. So we're gonna talk about how data helps us make these decisions. We're back to my funnel. Let's talk about how exploit intelligence fits into the funnel. We know we have our automation bucket, we have our high touch bucket. Exploit intelligence is gonna tell us about which kind of things we should really worry about and whether or not those things are already covered somewhere in the process. So the things that are in your automation bucket, most of those should be covered, even though things like your browsers and operating systems are often exploited, you shouldn't have to worry about those. They're effectively already in your patch cycle, you've already got that scheduled, you don't have to wait. The stuff that's in the high touch bucket are gonna be high effort, but statistically should only be 3 to 5% of your environment's exposure totally, which is a much more acceptable number for most teams to be able to digest and work through. Now, when we're talking about exploit intelligence, we're talking about, have we seen threat actors use it? If threat actors are using it, are they automating their attacks, or are these being used in highly targeted, advanced persistent threat attacks? Then we start talking about the criticality of the endpoint. Is this an internet-facing asset? Is this something that, if compromised, could lead to a total domain takeover? Are there other crown jewels that are existing on this endpoint? That's going to help us prioritize, again, that bottom step on the CTEM analysis, help us prioritize where we spend our energy. We know there's still vuln management work to do. Nobody thinks that any of these steps are going to say, okay, we can all go home. All the vuln management is automated. The goal here is to say we should be focusing the efforts in that high-touch bucket on the things that are going to make the most meaningful difference. And the rest of it should be on your set it and forget it mode. Now, we can take this yet another step further. I'm a big fan of continuing to drill down because I told you data helps us make informed decisions. Even the things in the high-touch bucket, we need to prioritize further because that could still be thousands of vulnerabilities. So then we're going to look at what kind of threat actors are exploiting these known exploited vulnerabilities. For most organizations, ransomware and botnets are at the top of their list of concerns because those are the ones that have the greatest potential to do financial damage to your organization. For some organizations, advanced persistent threats and nation-state actors are going to be a little bit higher than ransomware. But the point here is that when you look at what's happening in the exploit landscape, what are the threat actors doing, and what is happening in your environment, all of this combined tells you which CVE is the best use of your time today and which ones can you put off. Now again, I am a big fan of frameworks, so I'm going to give you one more framework you may not have heard of. This one is the stakeholder-specific vulnerability categories. This framework was created by Carnegie Mellon and the Carnegie Mellon Software Engineering Institute and CISA in the US. This is CISA's way of basically saying, how do we advise our government clients on which vulnerabilities they need to act on right now? But the great thing about the framework is that you can repurpose it in your organizations. What's important about this is when you as a leader have someone come to you and say, should we prioritize this vulnerability that I read about on bleepingcomputer.com, you now have the decision tree and all of the data points you need to justify that overtime or justify that time spent burning the midnight oil to resolve the issue because you know it meets your level of criticality and your level of urgency, and you've automated the rest of it. This basically says, looking at things like exploitation status, impact on our mission, the technical impact to the system involved, should I track it and remediate it as part of my normal workflows? Should I attend to it, which means maybe get it scheduled in the next week? Or should I act on it, which means, hey, all hands on deck, we need to get moving now. We've got to be able to get this resolved in the next 24 to 48 hours because it is the biggest threat. Informed decisions, let everyone know what the priority is, and let you have the confidence that you're investing your team's energy in the right spots. So I've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'm gonna bump through these really quickly. Let's talk about operational impact. When you do these things, what impact does it have on your organization? I talk to a lot of organizations who say, well, but I got all this pushback. I got these challenges. My teams are overwhelmed. Well, automation's gonna make them less overwhelmed. AI and automation are complex. Well, there's a lot of low-code, no-code workflows out there, and the tooling is really trending in that direction so that you can build these Lego brick approaches. Well, I don't have the right data to make these outcomes. Well, the right tools for doing automation should be always leveraging real-time data because it's critical to making a high-confidence decision. I don't have developers on my team. I don't hire engineers. Well, again, low-code, no-code workflows reduces the need for that kind of investment significantly. Automation's risky. I don't want to take my hand off the steering wheel. Completely understand. We're still new to the world of AI and automation for a lot of organizations. But if you're using tooling that gives you that clarity, confidence scoring, deployment rings, you've got a lot of opportunity to keep the human in the loop and help make those decisions. And then lastly, well, I don't have the experts that understand automation. Once enabled, your super expert staff can pass off some of these automations to your junior staff and enable them to level up. This is a net gain for your industry. And I'll move through this slide very quickly. How do you actually go out and do this stuff? Go ask your grouchiest administrator what their most frustrating task is and what they wish they could get off their plate. They're gonna tell you where to start. Align with your business priorities. Define your KPIs early and measure them often. Start simple. One of the biggest mistakes I see is people who want to automate the most complex task first. Start simple, prove the value, build the muscle. And then integrate with your existing tools. Many of your existing tooling and workflows probably have automation capabilities that you can unlock. Then you got to show that ROI, right? Leaders want to know that the investment they've made in automation was worth it. What kind of time have you saved? How fast does it take for a new employee to get up to speed because their automation is, or their onboarding is automated? How much cost have you reduced? Did you reduce the number of people it requires to do your monthly patching workflows? Did you increase throughput so your admins are able to do more tasks because they don't have to be software engineers to do it? And customer satisfaction, and this one's a big one. Maybe reduce the number of phone calls to the help desk because of patching taking people out of being able to actually do their job. These are just some of the opportunities you have to measure the meaningful impact of good vulnerability reduction, not just vuln management. We're reducing vulnerabilities, we're improving our ecosystems, and we're making a measurable difference. And this is one of those areas where I think we can move past the big bucket of dirty mop water and the spreadsheets of vulnerabilities and into knowing that our teams get to go home at night saying, I left my environment safer than it started this morning.